Welcome, fellow duelists. Let's journey together through the history of Yu-Gi-Oh!
It's time to duel!
Where we shall look at the very best duelists to have ever picked up a deck.
Get your game on!
Different legends.
Let's rev it up!
From different eras.
I'm feeling the flow!
A journey through time and space.
Ladies and gentlemen!
And every journey has a beginning.
Into the brains!
Long ago, when the pyramids were still young, Egyptian kings played a game of great and terrible power. But these shadow games erupted into a war that threatened to destroy the entire world, until a brave and powerful pharaoh locked the magic away, imprisoning it within the mystical Millennium Items. Now, 5,000 years later, a boy named YuGiOh unlocks the secret of the Millennium Puzzle. He is infused with ancient magical energies, for destiny has chosen him to defend the world from the return of the Shadow Games, just as the brave Pharaoh did.
It's time to duel!
Welcome, one and all. More like a welcome back for me, honestly. I really miss making this kind of content, and what better way to return to it than telling you all about my hyperfixations? Today we're reaching far back in my childhood for something spicy. I've already done some content on this series before on my channel, but not ever in this manner. Today, my friends, we're destroying the moon! Covering Yu-Gi-Oh! You know, now that I think about it, are they really so different? Today, duelists, we will be talking about one of the pillars of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise, the anime. As Yu-Gi-Oh! Is this unique franchise where each medium really is different enough from each other that even though they all center around the same large concepts, you have these large swaths of fans that are only fans of one or a few of these pillars. There are a number of folks who are a fan of everything Yu-Gi-Oh! But like certain parts of it more than others. And of course you have people who love everything in equal measure. And you have people who only watch the anime, or people who only play the card games, or people who only play the video games, or the manga, etc. For the purposes of clarity, this series is going to be 3 parts. First, and today's focus, is the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime and its many different series. Next will be the trading card game. This will be mostly a how to play video for people who have zero or minimal experience with the game itself. I'll be going over the different card types, the rules, and general tips on how to build a deck, with a few examples of decks that I like to run. Quick note, this isn't going to be a how to get into competitive video, as I'm not a competitive player. I'm more of a casually competitive. This is going to be more how to learn the game and get your foot in the door, although I will be linking various resources and other Yu-Gi-Tubers that can take you to that next step if you're willing. And finally, we'll be talking about the video games. This will encompass a brief history of the games of old, but will primarily focus on the 5 games that have either released recently or are going to release in the near future. With that out of the way, why don't we start where all good stories begin? 5,000 years ago, in a time of ancient pyramids and the Shadow Games. First, before we begin properly, I want to make the smallest of side notes to mention Season 0, because if I don't, I feel like I'll get some comments about it. Before Yu-Gi-Oh! Proper debuted on TV by Studio Gallop, there was a Season 0 of sorts, as dubbed by fans, that was done by Toei Animation. Both Season 0 and the Duel Monsters anime we know today adapt from the same material, but it's clear which one took off. It's an interesting watch, but for the purposes of this video, I'm not going to go into too much detail for it. Just like how I'm not going to go into too much detail on the manga itself, as I'm just not familiar with that pillar of the franchise, and I hope to eventually, but I feel like it wouldn't be right of me to be so thorough with something that I don't have first-hand knowledge of. Alright, now starting proper. Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, or as I'll refer to it from this point on to avoid confusion with future Yu-Gi-Oh! Series, Duel Monsters. It was an anime adapted from the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga written by Kazuki Takahashi. This original anime was brought to us by Studio Gallop, who has worked on every single Yu-Gi-Oh! Series except for the most recent, Yu-Gi-Oh! 7s. This is for the Japanese release, of course, as English releases have been passed through quite the crazy path, but we'll get to that when the time's right. Duel Monsters came to us over here in the West on September 29th, 2001. I was 5 years old when the show came out, and deeply entrenched in the Pokemania of the late 90s. So, Yu-Gi-Oh! Slotted in real nice since it used to air either right before or right after Pokemon. My memory's a little bit foggy on that. Duel Monsters shares similarities with Pokemon in the fact that its first series was its most popular, and what helped it break out here in the West. But unlike Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has had a bit more of a drastic downturn in public presence after the original series had finished airing. This was due to in part of the following series all following new protagonists entirely, whereas Pokemon continued to follow Ash Ketchum. In the long run, I think that this is now to Yu-Gi-Oh!'s benefit as a show, but we'll get into that once we get to the other shows. Duel Monsters follows Yuki Moto, an extremely short, extremely spiky-haired boy who can be described as marshmallow. He's got a kind heart, but I'm pretty sure if you poked him, he'd double over and start to deflate. First thing you notice about Yuki, outside of his hair, of course, that's going to be a running trend with Yu-Gi-Oh! Characters, is this little pyramid hanging around his neck. This is the Millennium Puzzle, an ancient Egyptian artifact given to him by his grandfather, an archaeologist who has long since retired and started up a game shop where Yuki stays. That's okay, because he's not alone. He attends school with his close group of friends, Taya Gardner, friendship is my true power personified, Joey Wheeler, hey, watch where you walk in here, and Tristan Taylor. Anyway, you start to see the dynamics of the group early on in the show. Joey's the hothead, frequently he butts heads with Tristan and Taya, and Tristan Tristan and Joey used to bully Yuki, going so far as to take a piece of his Millennium Puzzle before it was solved and throwing it into a canal. This dynamic between them changes when Tristan and Joey find themselves on the end of bullying themselves. Now, this character here is referred to as Tetsuo Ushio, but he reappears in the later Yu-Gi-Oh! Series with a localized name, Tetsuo Trudge. For consistency's sake, I'll be referring to him here as Trudge. Trudge beats up Joey and Tristan, and turns to Yugi, and jokes that he's going to collect a bodyguard fee. Yugi stands up to Trudge and calls them to his friends, and from that point onward, they begin to hang out. At school, Yugi is teaching Joey how to play Duel Monsters, the hit new game that's sweeping the nation. Now, in Yu-Gi-Oh!, the trading card game is known as Duel Monsters. In our reality, it's known as Yu-Gi-Oh! You can use them interchangeably, but in the show, it's known as Duel Monsters. Weird. I know. Fun fact, Yu-Gi-Oh! Translates to King of Games, which here is the Yu-Gi-Oh! Equivalent to Pokemon Master. Yugi's grandfather runs a card shop as we mentioned earlier, and Duel Monsters is one of the games supported. Yugi tells Joey that he's got a rare Blue Eyes White Dragon card back at the shop, and invites his friends to go see it. Overhearing the conversation, we're introduced to Seto Kaiba. Seto is the CEO and lead designer of the worldwide corporation Kaiba Corp. He's a genius programmer and engineer and is rich beyond compare. He takes immediate interest in the rumor of a Blue Eyes White Dragon card. At Solomon Muto's game shop, Yugi introduces his new friends to his grandfather who shows off the rare card. Kaiba enters the scene and offers to buy the Blue Eyes off of Solomon, but he's denied as he says it's more valuable than any cost Kaiba could offer. Kaiba leaves frustrated, but he's not done yet. He orchestrates having Yugi's grandfather kidnapped and forces Yugi to meet up at his own personal stadium to duel for his grandfather's safety. Yugi, Taya, Joey, and Tristan arrive at the stadium, and Taya reinforces their bonds with markings drawn on each of their hands. Yugi steps up to the challenge against Kaiba using his grandfather's deck. Before the duel begins, the true mystery of Yugi's Millennium Puzzle becomes revealed. Yugi transforms, a spirit held within the puzzle enters Yugi's body, and begins to duel Kaiba. This duel is in Kaiba's favor as he summons 3 blue-eyed white dragons in one turn, and this brings me to a very important point we need to pause for. So, Yu-Gi-Oh! The anime helped spark the trading card game into being what it is today. But it's very important to note that the trading card game came out to the West almost halfway into the first season's debut into the West. By the time the card game had actually come to us, 19 episodes had aired internationally. The point I'm trying to make is that the first season of Duel Monsters, consisting of 40 episodes, does not follow the rules of the card game to a T. There were multiple instances of cheating as considered by the standards of the game nowadays, but it's because the actual game was not over here and developed by the time these episodes were written and dubbed. Japan has its own version of the trading card game traditionally called the OCG, or Original Card Game, but for the purposes of this video, that's neither here nor there. So, all this to say, Kaiba shouldn't have been able to summon these dragons all in one turn, but screw the rules, he has money. Yugi's on his last draw, the odds are against him, but in the faith he places in his grandfather's deck, he draws the one card he needs to win, the final piece of Exodia, the Forbidden One. With all 5 pieces gathered together in hand, Yugi, in this possessed state, follows through and removes the evil from Kaiba's heart. After this duel, he retreats inward, and word travels of this nobody kid defeating the dueling world champion Seto Kaiba. It travels to the creator of Duel Monsters, Maximilian Pegasus, of such an upset, and Pegasus begins to scheme. A tape is sent to the Muto household containing a message for Yugi himself, bringing him into a dark and mysterious shadow game. Yugi is challenged to a duel with a time limit. If he's unable to win, he shall forfeit his grandfather's soul. Unfortunately, Yugi is just barely not able to win, as the time limit ends just before he's about to call the deciding blow. Pegasus steals Yugi's grandfather's soul and seals it away inside a card, inviting Yugi to try to reclaim his soul by attending his personally hosted tournament on his private island, Duelist Kingdom. This sets forward the events of the rest of the season, and end our extremely detailed play-by-play of Duel Monsters. I will very quickly say that as the show goes on, it does improve a lot, and evolves as new characters are introduced. Yugi's own deck evolves, and larger and bigger threats threaten the world, the Battle City, Virtual World, Waking the Dragons, and the Grand Championship arcs. Of these seasons, I will say my personal favorite happens to be the Battle City arc, as the game gets fancy new redesigns, and we get to see a lot of the duels from Yugi, Kaiba, and even Joey, with new and growing aces and the introduction of the Egyptian God card plot. Plus, the duel of Yugi vs. Joey is a personal favorite. The first of 3 movies also takes place directly after the conclusion of the Battle City arc. This was a theatrically released movie called The Pyramid of Light. This is a story centered around Kaiba's increasing efforts to win in a duel against Yugi, more specifically the spirit that resides within the Millennium Puzzle, dubbed the Pharaoh, or Yami Yugi. He has a real name, but I'll save that for you to discover on your own. This movie centers around the Yugi vs. Kaiba conflict, but increasingly bears the fangs of an ancient Egyptian threat of a dead god Anubis. I highly recommend checking it out, as it has a lot of hype moments and is very nostalgic for me, and the soundtrack is full of bangers.
You're not me. You know what I need, and it's not another serenade. I get so tired of all the things you say. Give me what I want. If you only would, I'd gladly throw this all away.
The other 2 movies relate to Duel Monsters, but I'm gonna wait on talking about the second movie, Bonds Beyond Time until we're done talking about the third Yu-Gi-Oh series, Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds. Third Yu-Gi-Oh movie, though, Dark Side of Dimensions, is the series' 20th anniversary celebration. It takes place after the conclusion of the series and develops the characters further after the conclusive end of the show. I'm being a bit vague about this because I don't want to spoil the end of the show. I will say this is my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh movie of all time and is well worth the investment to get to it. Before we move on, I do want to comment on something that is a bit more minute compared to all the things surrounding it, but the three main characters we have dueling in this series are Yugi, Kaiba, and Joey. Other characters come in and leave and have duels every now and then, even if it's a very minuscule amount, but these three here are the main duelists we'll see regularly, so I want to highlight their decks for a quick moment. First of all, we have Yugi, or more accurately, we have Yami Yugi's deck, as late events of the show tend to have Yugi as a slightly different deck due to certain events, but for the ease of use, we'll just refer to this deck here as Yugi's deck. At the beginning of the show, this deck is a hot mess. Of course, it's related to that issue above about the trading card game not really being established yet. Everyone's deck early on was garbage, as a large majority of the cards were just bad. But we have a lot of normal monsters here with no secondary effects and stats that just aren't good. Of the cards he starts with, the only ones that could be considered okay even in this time he has are Mystical Elf and the Giant Soldier of Stone. And that's about it until Dark Magician gets support later on, but only because they have high defense values. It isn't until Battle City and Yugi picks up a bit of his new cards like Dark Magician Girl and supporting skills for this Dark Magician archetype. This does elevate his ace monster into a bit of a usable state, but by the end of the show it's refined enough from what is used to include Magnet Warriors and even the Egyptian gods. Ranking Yugi's performance out of the total number of duels he had, Yugi's only had a 76% win-to-loss ratio. He's Yugi frickin' Moto, and he can only win 3/4 of the duels he's had? More like the king of lames. This trend follows through with Kaiba and Joey's decks, but they do split in opposite directions. Joey's deck early on is hot garbage, and there's literally no saving grace until the Battle City arc when he gets Jinzo. He does get a few new traps to spruce up his deck, but all in all it's a pretty weak deck overall. Joey's lost more duels than he's won, but only just barely. He's got a total of 48% of win/loss, which, yeah, makes sense. Kaiba, though, is seeing the most drastic upswing in usability as the series went on. First and foremost, his starter deck, like all of them, is pretty bad, but he's had a pretty healthy spread of offense and defense for what was available at the time. And as time went on, Blue Eyes only became better and better as an archetype. Of course, Kaiba wouldn't be around to see the absolute explosion of the Blue Eyes archetype that it would see in the 5Ds era, but that's a topic for the next video. Kaiba's win-to-loss ratio is 66%, as out of his 21 duels, he was able to win 14 of them. It may be less than Yugi, but protagonists are going to have their numbers higher than normal characters because they're the stars of the show. So having this high as a side character, that's really good. Moving forward, we're going to be switching over to the second Yu-Gi-Oh series, Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, or Generation Next. This takes place about 10 years after the ending of Duel Monsters, and stars the new leading hero, Jaden Yuki, or in the Japanese version, Yuki Judai. From here on forward, GX has the most drastic name changes from the dub to the sub version, but I'm going to be using their English names because I just kind of prefer them. Real quick before we start this series though, I have to point out how spunky the opening theme is. It's exactly what you'd think an early 2000s kid show theme song would be.
Chilling out with the crew in the schoolyard, finding trouble, never looking too hard. Well, back at class, they never taught us this. Some things you gotta learn, hit or miss. Tough times, hard climbs, we'll take them on together. Right now, let's go! Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, Generation Next. Game on, get your game on. Come on, you better play your cards right. Game on, get your game on. We'll make the grade and win this fight.
I do have to give special attention though to the JP and Italian openings. They're really good too. Here's a small sample of each.
GX. YuGiOh, YuGiOh. Is your life just a game? YuGiOh, YuGiOh. La partita della vita è un duello senza appello. Scegli il campo e in un lampo le tue mosse e contromosse. Guarda in faccia la minaccia e stringi forte la tua sorte che fa parte delle carte. Just when I young, 하지만 대노유매. 어이 지속해 keep holding on. 태가 도독한 나 그때諦めかけてた broken dreams 置き去りの約束胸に刺さったまま抜けない君の言葉を
Jaden here is a hyperactive, spunky kid who tends to slacken his work, but more than makes up for his failings by bringing energy, a good attitude, and trust in his friends. The series begins with him being led to the entrance exam to enter Duel Academy, a school built around the honing of dual monster skills which was founded by Kaiba Corp. On the way, he bumps into a strapping young lad in ceremonial passing of the torch meeting. Quite literally so, as our previous protagonist, YuGiMoto, gives Jaden a Wing Karibo card, a new version of a monster Yugi himself used quite a bit in the original show. But here, we get a glimpse of just how different this show is. Jaden begins to see the spirit of the Wing Karibo as if he were a guardian. It's a topic we'll get fleshed out over the season and the rest of the show, Jaden's ability to see and sense the dual spirits of certain cards. Making it to his entrance exam and just in time, he is met with Professor Crowler, a head teacher at Duel Academy's highest tier dorm who immediately dislikes Jaden's tardiness. He aims to teach Jaden a lesson by whooping the floor with him and barring his entry to the school. The two duel, and Jaden begins by showing off his archetype, the Elemental Heroes. I didn't explain this during Duel Monsters because the main character's archetypes tended to ebb and flow based on a few different kinds of specific monsters, since again the trade card game wasn't as established, so archetypes weren't similarly as established back then. Nowadays though, you'd be hard pressed to find a Yu-Gi-Oh character that wasn't built around a certain archetype. Jaden's Elemental Heroes are several comic book inspired heroes that can fuse together to create larger and grander heroes. In the beginning of the show, Jaden's ace monster is the Elemental Hero Flame Wingman, although by Season 2 and beyond, it becomes Elemental Hero Neos. Jaden manages to summon Flame Wingman in this duel against Crowler and pulls out a win and placement among Duel Academy's ranks. However, due to his low score on the written tests, he's placed in the lowest tier dorm. Duel Academy is set up with 3 dorms with increasing level of prestige and honor, starting with the Slifer Red dorm, the Raw Yellows, and then topping off with the Obelisk Blues. Quite a Kaiba thing to do, honestly, to put the card that he had as the top rank. In the Slifer Red dorm, Jaden meets up with his 2 roommates, Cyrus Truesdale and Chumley Huffington, one of whom will actually go on to matter, but only barely. I may sound like I'm being a bit harsh, but it's only because I love GX. It's a tonally different yet similar show to Duel Monsters, and that may sound contradictory, but this show is set up quite differently. For the large majority of the show, it takes place in Duel Academy, so you're not seeing a lot of new locations constantly, and going on world travels like you did in Duel Monsters. So the tone early on is set up to be a bit more slice of life with everyday issues happening. For some, this may seem less focused, but I enjoy getting to see Jaden in company of react to various situations he's placed into. Come at the end of the first season, stakes do get raised a bit as other characters such as Bastian Misawa, Alexis and Atticus Rhodes, and Chaz Princeton come to take on the Shadow Riders, Dark Duelists who are aiming to revive the 3 Sacred Beasts, mythical monsters set to revival that of the Egyptian god cards. There's also a fantastic rivalry between Jaden and Cyrus's older brother, Zane Truesdale, and the threats only increase as Jaden is pitted against the Society of Light, the forces of the Dark World, and YuGiOh, and even the epitome of darkness itself. I will say the final 2 seasons of the show are totally different to the first 2, and are more in line with Duel Monsters. It takes itself more serious, more on this in a moment, and even going into the 4th season is some of the darkest YuGiOh has been willing to go. Jaden goes through some shit, and he is one of my favorite characters because of it. That being said, I have 2 important things I need to discuss about this show if you're going to check it out. First and most important, the 4th and final season of this show was not dubbed in English. It's unfortunate, but 4Kids and Konami were going through some legal disputes during the dubbing of this show, and for whatever reason, the final season was left undubbed. So if you want the first 3 seasons dubbed, you will have to switch to subbed for the 4th and final season. It's pretty jarring, I will admit, but it is workable. I do recommend pushing past that feeling because Season 4 is some of the greatest stuff in the entire series. And again, that opening song is really good. Second is that the English dub of this series is really something else. It's fully nostalgic for me, but it really goes ham in abridging itself. If any of you are familiar with Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged, Yu-Gi-Oh! GX's dub is pretty much Yu-Gi-Oh! GX abridged by itself. There are dubbing decisions which do hamper the seriousness of certain scenes, but I don't think it fully ruins the enjoyment of them. It's a different kind of enjoyment. There's some really funny stuff here, as it constantly rags on itself and Yu-Gi-Oh! As a whole. If you're looking for something that is more tonally balanced, I do recommend the sub version, but both are valid. Even though GX didn't introduce fusion summons to the series, it's definitely the one that focuses on them the most, and begins the trend of each new series highlighting a new summoning method that comes to the trading card game. Fun fact, there's a cancelled movie that was tooled around during the first year of GX's debut that would have crossed it over with the cast of Duel Monsters, titled Yu-Gi-Oh! Vs. GX. It was going to feature the cast of GX as they took a field trip to Domino City and encountered Yugi and Joey as the mysterious Sartorius Kumar plotted to defeat Yuki and other legendary duelists. As this movie fell to the wayside, ideas from it were repurposed into the Society of Light story arc from the 2nd season of GX, as Sartorius became a central character in the 2nd season of the show. Before moving on to the next show, we're going to run over very briefly the archetypes of the main characters of the show and their decks. Unlike Duel Monsters, we have a larger variety of duelists who duel regularly, so I'm going to breeze through them a bit faster. Starting off with Jaden, he begins the show running pure elemental heroes, which, while aesthetically pleasing, aren't really all that good in use, as they depend on you being able to pull the fusion cards, get their boss monsters out, and have the right materials in your hand. The boss monsters are pretty okay, but they're hard to get out since the materials are all rather weak on their own. Don't get me wrong, Jaden's deck is leagues better than Yugi at the start of Duel Monsters, but worse than his deck at the end of Duel Monsters. As time goes on, he adds a whole nother support archetype and the Neospatians into his arsenal, and even gets the new ace monster with Neos. But still, his deck is pretty lacking at this time, and like Yugi and Kaiba before him, elemental heroes would be given support later on that would much better improve their decks. It's just a shame Jaden wouldn't be able to take advantage of them. Throughout the series, Jaden takes part in about 95 duels, and he wins 78 of them. The other 17 duels are a mix of duels that end in no result, draws, and losses. So this leaves him with about 82% of his duels ending in victory. Next up we have Cyrus Truesdale, and he runs the Vehicroid monsters, mechanical monsters that like to quickly fuse together to make bigger bosses. Huh, that sounds familiar. Unfortunately, this deck kinda blows. Steamroid and Drillroid are pretty good, but would shine in a much better deck. Cyrus doesn't do all that often, but his win-to-loss ratio is about 55 to 45%, so immediately we see a drop in quality here, but he's still higher than Joey. Alexis Rhodes runs Cyber Angels, which I will say is a really good deck nowadays. It's unfortunate here she doesn't take advantage of all the cards that make it so. Like Cyrus, her win-to-loss ratio is a bit more split, although unlike him, she has a bit more not victories than victories. Zane Truesdale runs a Cyber Dragon deck, which is basically a better version of the Duel Monsters Blue Eyes White Dragon, but with the special ability to flood the field with monsters if your opponent controls monsters and you don't. Later on, he'd add the Cyber Dark monsters to this set and make his deck kinda worse, but overall, he has the best deck in the entire show, and his win rate's about 65% in his favor. So far, of course, he is higher than the previous, but considering he's not the protagonist, this is pretty respectable, and he is about the same as Kaiba is. Jesse Anderson is the final GX dual cell cover, as he becomes pretty prominent over the course of the 3rd season, and because I have a bit of a bias for him in his archetype, he uses crystal beasts that focus on sending monsters to the spell and trap card zone when they're destroyed that give you additional effects. While it's not a great deck, I'm going to be honest, I have a lot of fondness for it. Solid stats for the monsters, and it works pretty well in decks supporting the Sacred Beasts. His win rate's similar to Cyrus, about 55 to 45, as he's won 8 of the 15 duels he's been in, but think again, this was for only one season, so he does get a pass. Moving on from GX, Kazuki Takahashi has stated that he originally envisioned GX as the final Yu-Gi-Oh show, but around the end of 2006, the idea was proposed for our next stop on a retrospective journey, YuGiOh 5Ds. So, I remember the title of this show being a huge point of contention for people when it first came out, but looking at it closer, it's not too hard to decipher. It comes from the 5 signer dragons that came from the main characters in the show, the 5 dragons, 5Ds. Since I've made it a habit now to talk about all the OPs, the English opening here, Hyperdrive, is really solid.
Going fast makes me feel alive. My heart beats in hyperdrive. Do you think you can win only if I lose? Just let destiny choose. I can hear you breathing. I can see you coming. I can feel the wind that's blowing me around. Take a shot at me, running side by side. It's a blur as I go by. I can hear you breathing. I can see you coming. I can feel the wind that's blowing me around. See the sun arise and fire in the sky. Greatness thrusts itself into our lives.
Of the original English openings, this one's my favorite, but I recently learned about the other openings that could have been the Season 1 theme, as 4Kids held a contest for users to vote on would be the final theme song. The others are kinda okay, but this one here, Ride to Survive, I think I love just as much.
Check it out. It's time to make a move. Never has a moment felt so right. No doubt. It's down to me and you. Moving faster than the speed of light. I can feel my engine pumping faster, faster. Raging with an appetite for turbo speed. I can't stop till you see what I got, 'cause I was born to be a winner. Take a good look, my game is off the hook, 'cause I am no beginner. Lean on me, listen to my machine kicking into overdrive. We were born to ride. We ride to survive. Yeah!
The story begins sometime in the future of the previous 2 shows in New Domino City. This is the first Yu-Gi-Oh show that is more vaguely connected to the original timeline. We're not given a certain number of years, although we are still in the same continuity, as there are references which we'll go over. Our story stars Yusei Fudo. He's a noble and heroic young man who's proficient in dueling and riding, which is excellent because he's this world's many advancements in the dueling scene. New synchro monsters have exploded in popularity, which act like fusions between normal monsters and new, weaker tuner monsters, without the use of a spell card. This plus a new mobile version of dueling called Turbo Dueling, which duelists will race with specialized vehicles with dual discs embedded in their frame. Duels tend to play out much like on-foot duels, although a new mechanic known as speed spells exists, that allow the use of extra abilities based on the number of speed counters the duelist has. More in-depth discussions of this aren't needed to enjoy the show, but will be available in part 2 of the series for the trading card game. New Domino City isn't in a right state at the beginning of the series, as a portion of the population is segregated in what's known as the Satellite, as being the lower quality of life for the poor and desperate. Yusei reveals early on that his old best friend, Jack Atlas, stole his first ever built duel runner and prize card Stardust Dragon in the duel. Jack used both to become the turbo dueling champion he is now and excels far beyond the status quo, whereas Yusei is relegated to the ghetto of the satellite. Yusei plans to break through into New Domino City in order to challenge Jack to a duel to reclaim what he'd lost, but he comes across Sector Security, a corrupt police force that is determined in keeping those in the satellite where they believe they belong. Leading the force is Tetsuo Trudge. Hey, wait a minute, we've seen this guy before. Yes, this is the same character as the bully from Duel Monsters, who was responsible for bullying Yugi, Tristan, and Joey, and bringing them together eventually. This means we're probably about 15 to 20 years in the future of Duel Monsters, but again, no exact time frame. Now, this might inspire excitement that we might see older Duel Monsters and even GX characters, but I'm gonna rip that band-aid off real quick. Trudge is the only character from a previous series that appears throughout the course of this show. Although there is a small reference to Joey Wheeler of all people right here with a character that's only known in the dub as Jesse Wheeler, Joey's cousin. In the original version, this character is not named and made directly connected to Joey, even if the design is apparently made to do so. Ooh, we got lost on a tangent there. But that's what the show is all about. Master Faster, dueling in hyperdrive. Now back to our story summary. Yusei's about to win out against Trudge, even though he tried to get the upper hand through underhanded means. Yusei makes it to the city interior and finds Jack and challenges him to a duel. Interested in the chance to duel once again, he accepts Yusei's offer, and the two face off in a secret duel in the Kaiba Dome. The two are evenly matched until both duelist dragons hit the field. Yusei has, at least temporarily, reclaimed control of his Stardust Dragon, while Jack pits it against his own Red Dragon Archfiend. During the clash, a bright red dragon interrupts their battle and knocks them both off of their duel runners. The duel ends with no clear victor, and Yusei and Jack both discover glowing red marks on each of their forearms. Before anything else though, Jack's manager and the head of Sector Security, Rex Goodwin, arrives on the scene with a slew of officers. Yusei is arrested and sentenced to be rehabilitated in the facility, a prison. Eventually, Goodwin would learn of Yusei's own mark and pull some strings to get Yusei sprung from this facility, after he proves himself of course, and enlists him in a plot to prevent the destruction of New Domino City by finding other duelists that are marked with the sign of the dragon. This includes finding other legendary duelists who command similar Dragon Ace monsters like Yusei's and Jack's. These eventually come to be Akiza Izinski, master of the Black Rose Dragon, and the twins Leo and Luna. And by the end of the first season, we get the true fifth signer in Crow Hogan, who very quickly becomes a mainstay in the series. Akiza is a duelist who can inflict physicality in her cards using her psychic abilities. There's a bit I want to talk about this in just a few seconds as it relates to our next topic, but first I want to say a little bit more about these characters. Throughout this season, Team 5Ds also befriends two important characters. One is Amnesiac, known only as Bruno, who strangely enough seems to moonlight as a mysterious figure named Visor, who teaches Yusei the secrets behind Excel Synchro Summoning, which, to simplify an already abstract concept, Excel Synchros are advanced Synchro monsters that use a Synchro monster and a second Synchro monster that is also a tuner as its materials. It's basically a tier 2 Synchro that's a pain in the ass to summon, but its effects are usually well worth the cost. And the other character is Sherry LeBlanc. She's a turbo duelist competing in the Grand Prix, who, like Time 5Ds, is looking to take down Iliaster to avenge her father. During a trip to the Moment Express Development Organization, Sherry gets sucked up into a wormhole and is lost for good. This all culminates in the revelation that the three emperors of Iliaster are actually all androids that represent three stages of their creator's life, Aporia. He reveals his three selves were sent back from the future that was destroyed by Synchro Summoning, and that he and his three cohorts, Iliaster's 4 stars of destruction, were behind the events of New Domino City's despair. Yusei duels Aporia in a final struggle for victory and uses the bonds with his friends to end the threat of Aporia, whose goal is to summon the Arc Cradle, a massive megalith that is going to crash into the current nuclear generator to cause a destruction event so catastrophic it would mean the end of everyone within a 30-mile radius. Yusei wins the duel and that's it. Everybody is saved. You certainly got a beginning, a bumpy middle, and an end. Sounds good, right? Yeah, well, if it actually ended here, it wouldn't be my favorite YuGiOh show, It'd definitely be up there, but not my favorite. So, what did we miss? Oh boy. So, were you curious who this creator was? Or where Sherry went? Or where her arc resolution went? Or what the hell the point of Excel Synchro and Visor was? Or what about Aporia's 3 other cohorts that just never appeared? Do I have a story arc for you? But I'm gonna recommend you watch it for yourself because it is well worth the resolution and a very satisfying end to the arc. I will say though, the show covers 3 of the 4 stars of destruction. The 4th is mysteriously seen in a flashback in the future. Saying that out loud is kind of surreal. But he's never dueled by the main cast. I wonder if he'll become relevant soon. Oh, before we go further onto that topic, I want to go over the characters, as we're finally over with the difficulties with the show. I will say, this is the last YuGiOh show as of current writing that hasn't been fully dubbed, so from here on out, the English viewers will be able to get the full experience. Although, unfortunately, it isn't the last we'll hear of behind-the-scenes difficulties. So, characters! For the purpose of this video, I'll go over the cast of Team 5Ds. Pretty hardy collection of characters to go into detail with, I think. First off is Yusei Fudo. I'm not going to mince words, this is the best duelist out of the entire series, bar none. His deck is strategically sound and is a lot more defensive than Yuki or Jaiden's decks ever were. He has a healthy amount of traps at his disposal, and all of his monsters, while weak on their own, have a lot of effects to make them work together and to get out his ace, the Stardust Dragon. Throughout the course of the series, Yusei has only officially lost 1 duel, and that duel was the flashback duel where Yusei lost against Jack. Throughout the entire run in the series, Yusei either wins or does not finish every single duel he is in. The closest he comes is in the Season 1 duel against Callum Kessler as a Dark Signer, where he's about to lose but is unable to finish the duel. But aside from that, Yusei is just that good. This could be attributed to the fact that he's the oldest YuGiOh protagonist has ever been, at 18 at the start of the series. Next up we have Jack Atlas, and over the course, he grows from a pompous and overly cocky duelist to a loyal friend and earns his attitude. His win rate, while not as high as Yusei's, is really quite commendable. Out of 45 duels over the course of the series, he's only lost 7 times, and didn't finish 5 duels after that. His total rate is 71%, and it's thanks to his powerful deck starring the Red Dragon Archfiend. His deck is tooled up for power and highly synchronizes with his fiery red attitude. Next, we'll tackle Leo and Luna. They don't see as much action as other duelists in the Team 5Ds because of their age, but it's really not anything special. Leo participates in 10 duels altogether, and he's only able to win 3 of them, so easy calculation, 30%. And the lowest of any main character so far. Utilizes the Morphtronic archetype, and yeah, it's just kind of there, nothing too special. Luna may have more plot relevance of being a signer for much longer than her brother, but she only duels in 6 duels across the whole series, and only wins 2 of them. So even though she won less duels than Leo, because of her total amount of duels, her total win rate is 33%. Next up is Kiza, because we go back to the High Rulers. She runs a plant deck which headlines the Black Rose Dragon. She duels 15 times over the course of the series, and ends up winning 7 of them confirmed. There are 2 duels that were not shown the result of through flashbacks, so for the purpose of this ranking, I'm not going to count them the final percentage. So out of 13 duels, she's won 7, which is 53%. And finally, we have Crow Hogan. Crow's an odd case. His entrance into the show as a tritagonist alongside Jack and Yusei was directly in part due to a few factors. 1, the previously mentioned psychic sex nonsense that shelved Kiza's development had affected her time as a main character. And 2, Crow was initially designed to be the final Dark Signer for the end of the first season, but the plans radically changed when his archetype, Blackwings, reached shores of the TCG. They exploded in popularity, and the showrunners decided they hadn't seen support for a new archetype so quickly before, so they decided to change Crow's role. And since Akiza had left sort of void in Team 5Ds, Crow fit in nicely. He becomes a signer, and his Blackwing Dragon is retroactively made into a signer dragon. And definitely so fits because his Blackwing deck is one of the most known archetypes from 5Ds as a whole. Out of the 25 duels Crow had, 10 more duels than Akiza ever had, and he came in later than she did. Crow won 19 of them, and of these 6 that he didn't win, he only outright lost 3 of them. So his total win percentage is 76%. Dude's the second highest win percentage in the entire show because his deck's so OP. Now, with the conclusion of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, we're moving on to the next series, Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal, right? Nope, because we have the final Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie to talk about. Releasing in America in February 2011, about 2 months before the next show dropped in Japan, and about 7 months before we get to see Zexal for the first time, Yu-Gi-Oh! Bonds Beyond Time is a 3D crossover film that contains the heroes of Yu-Gi-Oh!, Duel Monsters, GX, and 5Ds. I remember when this film was announced, it hyped up every living molecule inside my being. This was a dream film. I wasn't able to see this one in theaters, the only movie I wasn't to in this series, but I still heavily enjoyed it. Although, upon learning it was only 50 minutes long, basically the length of an episode and a half, it did take some wind out of the sails. It's a bit of a shame though, because it basically boils down to a short introduction sequence for each of the 3 protagonists and then a single duel. But, you know, with my minor gripes about the length are over, this is awesome. First, I'm going to place where this movie takes place in the context of each series, as this movie is like 98% canon to each of them, but we'll get into that now. For Yusei and Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, this takes place between episodes 82 and 86, as they need to have met Bruno, but not yet experienced the Crash Town arc. For Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, this takes place after the end of the show, including Jaden's final duel. And finally, for Duel Monsters, it's a little stickier, as Yugi is shown to be taller here, so we assume he's older than the events of the original show. But for certain events regarding the end of the show, this can't be directly after. So we'll tentatively put this sometime during the Awakening of the Dragons arc. Also, Pegasus cameos in this movie, but he seems to still have a Millennium Eye, which he shouldn't have. So this feels more like an animation error than anything, but I just wanted to point it out. You know, I could let you watch the movie for yourself and skip on describing the plot like the other two just so you can get a genuine first-time viewing, but I figure I want to at least cover one of the movies here, and this one seems to be the best one to do so. Yeah, I could go on a long-winded, detailed process about the intricacies of the plot, but honestly, we both know how long this video is. I'm gonna let Shady Vox take it over.
If you try to duel me, it's gonna make me stronger. I need you to play a card now, cause I can't wait much longer. My deck's like totally gonna beat ya. You may think you're harder, but just wait for when I make my next move, when Kariba's coming at ya. Yo, listen up, homeboy, let me be the tutor, about to tell you all about how we saved the future. I started out with Jade and Yugi hanging out in Dennis. Last thing I knew, Crowler had me playing tennis, and this guy rolls up on his motorcycle. He's got a freaky ass mask like that Myers named Michael is trying to kill me, man, for all he's worth. Shouting out this weird crap about saving the earth, and then he revs up his bike. He's got the need for speed. It's a good thing I played all that Assassin's Creed, but then the sky turned black. Out comes this huge dragon, the thing 5 times the size of a station wagon is in hot pursuit, shooting fireballs, got me jumping the roofs and got me climbing the walls to try to escape. But at the very last minute, I whipped out my duel disc and I push it to the limit, saying, if you try to duel me, it's gonna make me stronger. I need you to play a card now, cause I can't wait much longer. My deck's like totally gonna beat ya. You may think you're harder, but just wait for when I make my next move, when Kariba's coming at ya. Well, as it turns out now, I'm not the first sucker who's had a run-in with this masked motherfucker. But now we gotta skip 100 years or 3, cause the story ain't told chronologically. But hey, don't get confused, understanding's a breeze. This action takes place in the world of 5Ds. Yusei and his friends were just driving around when guess who shows up with an evil sound? He steals Yusei's dragon, and then he takes off bragging. Yusei's tattoo glows, it somehow knows how to travel through time, and I can hear you whine, but don't you fret, cause things about to get. If you try to duel me, it's gonna make me stronger. I need you to play a card now. stronger. My deck's like totally gonna beat ya. You may think you're harder, but just wait for when I make my next move. When Karibo's coming at ya. So then you say me, we go back into the past. Man, this time travel game's one hell of a blast. But hey, this ain't Kansas, we ain't Dorothy and Toto. When all of a sudden, here comes YuGiMoto. We team up together, unstoppable force. We gotta challenge Paradox, so we'll win, of course. We take the guy down and we save our show. Ain't no one gonna mess with YuGiOh. Yeah! If you try to duel me, it's gonna make me stronger. I need you to play a card now, cause I can't wait much longer. My deck's like totally gonna beat ya. You may think you're harder, but just wait for when I make my next move. When Karibo's coming at ya. Get your game on! Yo, Jin and Yuki, 2017. Hey yo, where the f are my Cheetos at?
So there's a few things to unpack here. Getting to see Jaden in a post-season 4 light in English is so cool, and it's not the last time I'm gonna gush about that, I promise you. But getting to see references to Jesse and Zane as well, and Kaiba and Joey was real nice through their monsters. And hey, here's a Paradox! He's the 4th star Billyester that we never saw on the show, so this is what he was up to. It's just a shame the English audience had no idea who this was, because the storyline revealing who he was wasn't ever dubbed. Alright, so with this aside, we truly now are finished with YuGiOh 5Ds. It's not a perfect show, it bears its flaws pretty obliquely on the surface, and Lord knows the fandom will not let you forget how much they dislike the idea of card games on motorcycles.
Bro, did you hear that? Card games on motorcycles!
Card games on motorcycles.
Card games on motorcycles.
Card game on motorcycles!
Card games on motorcycles!
Card games on motorcycles!
Card games on motorcycles.
The resulting carnage lasted for at least 5 hours, and unfortunately there were no survivors. Oh, this just in. Card games on motorcycles!
Card games on motorcycles!
Card games on motorcycles!
But at the end of the day, what it does from beginning to end, it shows a lot of heart, and it goes into a lot of dark places and shows a more mature side of the franchise that we hadn't seen before. The opening theme is the best in the series, yes, even better than Duel Monsters, literally duel me on this. Yusei is the perfect amount of stoic and caring to avoid being cliche. He just genuinely cares for his friends and for what's right, and god damn it, he enjoys his milk. A soundtrack of pure flames and the best villains in the series, all packaged together with duelists who have decks that actually focus on strategy and playing the card game instead of plot armor. YuGiOh 5Ds is something really special, and I love that more and more people nowadays are seeing its high points. Now, we get to move to the series' low point. At least, everyone who began to watch the next series would say. YuGiOh Zexal dropped over here in the West not by 4Kids, the end result of all but the lawsuit Konami was taking over the license for YuGiOh Zexal's production, but technically it wasn't an immediate process. 4Kids did begin the dub and continued until episode 41, and that was when it was transferred in full to Konami directly, and then 4Kids declared bankruptcy. Rest in peace, Fallen King, until they came back under the name 4 Entertainment 5 years later, and then almost immediately declared bankruptcy again. Major Umfi's comrade. Anyway, YuGiOh Zexal, like 5Ds, we introduced to a new method of summoning, Xyz summoning, which takes similarly leveled monsters and overlays them to create a boss monster. These differ from synchro monsters as you're not adding the 2 levels up, but instead taking, for example, 2 level 4 monsters to create a new monster that is rank 4. That's the basic premise, and we'll go over it in more detail in the next part, so don't worry right now if it's a little confusing. In short, you're basically making pairs. We begin with Yuma Tsukumo, who, I'm not going to mince words, this is my least favorite Yu-Gi-Oh protagonist, and based on my initial experience with Zexal, the difference was by far. To begin, I will say that Zexal is the point where I initially dropped off of YuGiOh. I did enjoy the beginning, and finding it on TV was harder than any of the other shows, as they changed stations. So when I finally started rewatching YuGiOh series in about 2016, I gave the first 20 episodes a try, and I just didn't like it. I considered it the odd one out, because where the next few shows came out, I enjoyed them a whole lot more. And to me, that was fine. I didn't have to like every YuGiOh show, especially since at this time, there were now 4 to choose from. However, like a mouse in the night, rumblings of people crossed my ears. Rumblings of people swearing that they knew Zexal's beginning was bad, but if you stuck through it, it became really good, possibly even being the best. Now, I was suspicious. Is that really possible? In truth, YuGiOh Zexal shares a lot of things with GX, and this is the key to understanding Zexal. You see, I was coming off of YuGiOh 5Ds, a more gritty and serious show with a lot older cast, going to a more fun and zany and wacky adventure with a dumb kid protagonist who doesn't like school and would rather have fun. Hey, wait a minute, this is just Jaden. So, I joke, but this is where we establish a pattern here with YuGiOh series, and we as viewers have to manage our own expectations. We have now alternated back and forth between more serious shows and more laid-back shows. More serious show, more laid-back show. It isn't going to immediately continue in the same exact pattern, but now we know enough data to know that there are 2 kinds of YuGiOh shows. And we can't fault the more laid-back ones for not being as serious and vice versa, but instead judge them for what they are. So, going to the beginning of Zexal with this new mindset, is the beginning any good? No. I'm still going to be frank. The first 20 or so episodes are, well, they're not great. Beginning plot introduces us to Yuma and his partner Astral, a being from another dimension who acts only on logic, but who has also lost all of his memories. They are scattered across 100 number cards that Yuma and Astral must recollect to recomplete his memory. If any of this is sounding familiar, it's basically the Yugi/Pharaoh relationship with a set number on it. And if the show kept to this exact formula for the first 20 episodes, I surely would rate it as the absolute lowest by no sharp margin. However, I will echo the opinion that it does get better and doesn't wholly stick to this formula. So here, for side characters, the only one outside of Yuma that really matters is Shark, whose real name is Reginald Castle. He's the local bully at the start of the show, but does grow over the course, and as his insecurities are tested, more about him is revealed. There are other side characters here, even one voiced by Sean Schemmel. But man, they just don't matter. I will say this definitely contributed to just how disinterested I was in the show initially, because the only characters I actually liked were Astral and Shark, and Astral himself doesn't duel, at least in the start, but simply tells Yuma what a bad duelist he is, and oh boy, Yuma is a bad duelist to begin. Shortly after this point though, we get introduced to a few new characters, and each of them brought intrigue and hooked me into the series for good. First off is Kite Tenjo, who from this point on I'm going to refer to his Japanese name Kaito, because it's just my personal preference for him and him alone. He is my favorite character in the show, by the way. Kaito is a number hunter, and he has this eerie ability to stop time, which isn't ever really brought up again after this point, and he's just cool. Then we're introduced to 3 brothers and a mysterious villain. The brothers, Trey, Quattro, and Quentin, are all jelly beans, and I love them. Because they're villains, but because they're villains by circumstance. They believe the actions they're taking are the best because they're loyal to their father. Yes, this is their father, dimensional shenanigans are involved. But Vetrix here, we learn, used to be friends with both Yuma and Kaito's fathers, until Kaito's father, Dr. Faker, another major antagonist, betrayed them both. So throughout the initial number hunting plotline, we quickly get revealed a story about a conflict between 3 men that bleeds through their children, the bonds that form from that conflict. And suddenly, the YuGiOh I loved was here all along. And this is just season 1. Oh boy! Zexal does this weird thing where the second season was kind of referred to as its own show, Zexal 2. This season is nuts. I literally cannot spoil a single thing about this season, but I will give my highest regard that you should definitely check this out. And where I previously thought that Zexal was the worst show by far, the second half of Zexal 1 slots it about the same as Duel Monsters but below GX and 5Ds. Zexal 2, however, puts it quality-wise at the top. 5Ds is still my favorite show up to this point, but its production issues and drop threads definitely do have to be taken into consideration. Yuma grows into a duelist who can stand on his own, and he doesn't have to rely on Astral to just barely get by. They become an actual team. Kaito gets a lot of screen time, and his monsters look so cool. Every time I look, it just unlocks something deep within me. Shark. Oh boy, do not Google anything about Shark. There were spoils aplenty. Let me do you this favor, don't Google anything. There's this character named Ray Shadows who's also really awesome. Also, don't Google anything about him either if you want to go in blind. The final duel is batshit insane. I am recommending you go watch the show immediately. Now, for character summaries to begin, we start with Yuma himself. I'm not going to be soft on this one. Yuma is a hard barrier of entry for the show. His voice isn't pleasing to listen to, and watching someone be bad at dueling for so long really belies the greatness that comes out of this show. It takes quite some time to get used to Yuma, but when he does settle in, it's much easier to get used to enjoying the rest of the show. Yuma's the first protagonist to use exactly 0 normal monsters, and honestly his deck is a lot better for it. He runs an Automatopoeia deck, so he has monsters that have names like Ga Magician and Go Golem in it. Get it? Makes a funny sound. His ace is really good though. Number 39, Utopia. It's an Xyz monster, so it just needs 2 of Yuma's many level 4 monsters to come out. And its effect lets you discard one of the monsters that were used to summon it to stop a battle. And with 2 monsters needing to be used to summon it, it has this effect twice. It's really good protection if the enemy can get the upper hand. However, with such a good deck, Yuma's poor skill at the beginning of the series really shows, and it's not just cards that lead to victory. Throughout the series, Yuma's dueled 94 times. Out of those duels, he's won 51. Yuma has the lowest win rate percentage at 54% out of any of the past and future protagonists. I will say 19 of these losses are in flashbacks early on in the series. If we take those out of the equation, then his win rate climbs up to 68. It's still the lowest out of all the protagonists we've seen thus far, and if we remember, the next highest was Yuki with 76%. Next up is Shark. He runs a deck based around sharks. Shark has dueled 32 times and has won 24 of them, with 2 duels ending in no result, meaning he has a 75% win rate. Again, for a rival, this is really good. Moving on over to Kaito, the best boy, he's running a Photon deck that stars his Galaxy Eyes Photon Dragon. Kaito was the first duelist to iterate off of Kaiba's Blue Eyes in the sense that it's now become a pattern that there are more blank eyes, blank dragons out there, and Galaxy Eyes here is the start to it all. Also, can I just take another second to gush over how cool this monster is? Anyhow, back to the topic. Kaito has only dueled 22 times over the course of the series, but he won 15 of those duels, and not one of them was shown the result of. 3 were draws and 3 were losses. Note though, that none of these losses were ever to Yuma. Yeah, that's right. Kaito is the first and only rival to never lose a duel to the main protagonist. That's how cool Kaito is. His win rate is 68%. Again, still good for a rival, and sad that it's tied for the protagonist of the show, with less than a third of the duels. Now, we're going to move 4 years into the future, as the 5th Yu-Gi-Oh! Series, titled Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5, arrives on the Western Shores on July 24th, 2015. Although it's to be noted it came out in America almost half a year later, this show is definitely the strangest out of all the Yu-Gi-Oh! Shows before and after. It's just crazy. So, before we get into the actual synopsis, I'm going to say this show reminds me a lot of the DC Comics crossover event Crisis on Infinite Earths. For those of you who know what I mean, yeah, we're going there. And for those who don't, let's get into it. We begin with a new protagonist, Yuya Sakaki. He wishes to be a duel tainer, which is a duelist who puts on a performance during the new action duels, which are sort of crosses with obstacle courses. Action duels do not exist in the TCG, so I'll briefly go over it here. When 2 duelists duel, normally they stand still or ride a D-wheel around a racetrack in a turbo duel. Here, the urge to be mobile and fast on their feet, as spread around the arena, are action cards, which have a variety of effects to protect the user and harm the opponent if they can reach them before the other. It's basically plot armor to extend or end a duel whenever the writers wish without needing to be duel specific. YuGiOh is a fun-loving boy who isn't too caught up in the studies of his class and, hey, wait a minute, I've seen this twice before now. Okay, put down your pitchforks. I know on the surface, YuGiOh seems like an exact Yuma clone, but in reality he's a lot better than Yuma. I like YuGiOh quite a bit. He's a fun guy who duels to make other people smile. He looks up to his father, who is a legendary duel tainer. And you just love seeing this boy smile, man. Also, he created our new summoning technique. Oh, are you not surprised? Yeah, so YuGiOh's father left him a pendulum, something he keeps with him at all times. And one day while dueling 3 of his effect monsters, Stargazer Magician, Time Gazer Magician, and Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon into what are known as pendulum monsters. Pendulum summoning is... well, it's definitely the most controversial summoning method of any in the entire series. I'll admit they're my least favorite, but I've grown to like them over time. So basically, you have these specific monsters that look like this. You may have seen one of these cards in the memes that joke about how YuGiOh cards have 1,000,000 words per card on it. So here's how they break down. These cards are basically half a monster card and half a spell card, but they're not both at the same time. It is either a monster or a spell based on how you choose to summon it. If you summon it like a normal monster, you ignore this box up here and treat it like an effect monster by reading this effect. If you decide to use its other effect, you do what's called setting the pendulum scale. I'll go over more specifics on how it works in either duel formats in later videos in the series, but for normal duels, you'd set them in specific zones near your other spell and trap cards. These indicators here are the scale number, and if you set 2 monsters in the pendulum zone, you can freely summon out monsters whose levels are between the numbers of your scales. Also, this means that you can ignore this box here, and only go off of this one up here. YuGiOh gains notoriety for the YuGiOh Duel School as hosting the creator of this brand new and exciting summoning method, but funnily enough, during his opening duel with the leading lady of the series, Zuzu Boyle, YuGiOh actually ends up losing. This is the first time that the main protagonist ends up losing to the lead female character, and as such, I will say that Zuzu is one of the stronger females in the series. Word of YuGiOh's exploits reached Declan Akaba, the poster boy of the Leo Institute of Dueling. Declan is a lot like Kaiba on the surface. He's confident and stoic and is CEO of his family company. Declan organizes a duel with YuGiOh to learn how he is able to pendulum summon. After gathering the necessary data, he lets YuGiOh win the duel and uses the information to produce his own pendulum cards. The second duelist to successfully pendulum summon is a Leo Institute student named Silvio Sawatari. He's got this Chaz Princeton energy about him where he's initially a cocky bully to YuGiOh, but after suffering defeat, he mellows out a bit. Now, all this seems par for the course for a YuGiOh show. Nothing too crazy, pretty safe. What's this show's gimmick, huh? Interdimensional war. Yep. So, in YuGiOh Arc 5, there are 4 distinct dimensions based mostly on previous YuGiOh shows. I'll accept Duel Monsters because Arc 5's main dimension is a stand-in for Duel Monsters. But let's go through this. Standard Dimension contains our heroes we've explained thus far, and starring our boy Yuya Sakaki, who develops pendulum summoning. Fusion Dimension. Duelists at Duel Academy learn the arts of fusion summoning. It involves a similarly named boy named Yuri, and a few alternate universe versions of some characters from Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, like Alexis Rhodes and Astra Phoenix. Synchro Dimension. Duelists at New Domino City turbo duel with their synchro summons to escape the oppression of class warfare as an alternate dimension version of Jack, Atlas, and Crow Hogan appear alongside a new boy, YuGiOh. Xyz Dimension. Duelists from Heartland City focus on the Xyz summoning, and oncoming invasions from the Fusion Dimension. New duelists Shay, Obsidian, and Yuto lead the cause as they spill over into the Standard Dimension. Also, Kaito appears in this show, because he's so cool! Yes, you guessed that right. YuGiOh here has some dimensional alternates that seem to originate from their respective dimensions. He's not the only one though, because Zuzu also has some counterparts in Selena, Rin, and Lulu from their respective dimensions. The basic gist of the story at this point is YuGiOh joining up with the group named the Lancers to protect other dimensions from the invasion of the Fusion Dimension and the Wrath of Duel Academy. There's a lot I'm glossing over here, and a finale that may etch as the top of the series. But man, the ideas they had with the series went balls to the wall, and the effort they took with it just amazed me. Unfortunately, it's not executed absolutely perfectly, as there were quite a few behind-the-scenes production issues that caused the group's stay in the Synchro dimension to last a little longer than expected. This part of the show is a little bit of a pace breaker, but for me it does pick back up. Certainly a wild improvement over the beginning of Sexel, although it does take just a little bit for these dimension aspects to come into play, but for here I think it works for the show's credit. Now, starting off with YuGiOh as a duelist, I will say his deck is quite good. There are quite a few Performapal cards that are absolutely broken for how overpowered they are. I will say YuGiOh's deck is definitely one that changes the most over the course of the series, as his Odd Eyes Pendulum Dragon has more forms than the number of words on Endymion, the Mighty Master of Magic. Bam! Smooth segue! Pendulum monsters, fusion monsters, Xyz monsters, synchro monsters. It's a one-size-fits-all dragon. I'm not going to spoil the end of this show, but I will say really quick that there's something about YuGiOh's first duel here with Zuzu. It's really cool if you know your YuGiOh history and how the show ends. I really wish I could gush about it here, but you'll know what I mean if you pay enough attention on your watch-throughs. YuGiOh dueled a total of 56 times and won 40 of his duels, leaving his overall percentage at 71%. It may seem rather low for a protagonist, but he's only full-on lost 4 duels out of 56. The rest are largely duels that ended in no result, and if we took those out of the equation, then he's up there with a solid 92% win rating, which obviously beats out everyone except for Yusei. Moving on over to Zuzu, she builds the Melodious monsters. Her early mastery over the fusion summoning mechanic lends well to her deck as her archetype excels with fusions. She's dueled 11 times over the course of the series and has won 5 of them, outright lost 3, and no result with the remaining 3. If we're counting the no results duels, she has a 45% win rate, which is just under Akiza, but if we're not counting those, then she's up at 62%, the highest female lead. Declan Acapella runs a DDD deck, which stands for Different Dimension Daemon. Hitting the nail a little too much on the head there, Declan. Declan utilizes not only Pendulum monsters, but also Synchro, Fusion, and Xyz monsters, and his deck is also pretty good. Interestingly enough, Declan is the first main rival whose ace isn't a dragon. He dueled a total of 15 times across the series and won 9 of those duels. Lost 3 duels, and 3 ended in no result. If we count everything together, his win rate is 60%. However, if we don't, then it's 75%. There are a lot of duelists in this show that only stick around for certain arcs of the show, so I'll leave the other you boys to your viewing experience. Moving forward 2 years, we get our first YuGiOh show in the style of 5Ds in quite some time. YuGiOh Vrains, released in the West on September 1st, 2018. The name of the show comes from 3 abbreviations: VR, AI, and NS, being virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and network system. So, Vrains. This series is something. I think that this has really had the chance to up everything that 5Ds established in an older YuGiOh protagonist, but it seems like these styles of shows tend to attract development issues. Before we go into the show proper, I do have to mention this is the shortest YuGiOh series, having only 3 seasons. There are threads that get dropped as the show progresses, and it's really quite a shame, especially when there are quite a few recap episodes that don't further the plot, as crunch culture was a widely reported issue that Studio Gallop underwent with this series, writing up recap episodes so they could have time to work on the actual progress episodes, so they wouldn't have to go on hiatus. My heart goes out to the animators of Studio Gallop, because it really does seem like this show is a death knell for them, seeing as it's the last time they ever worked on YuGiOh. Studio Bridge takes over for the next and current season. With that out of the way, I want to get to the good. So we start off with Yusaku Fukiji, a high school student with moonlights online as the famed Link Vrains player, Playmaker. Link Vrains is a massive VR network, not unlike an MMO. Yusaku is definitely a bit more reserved than Clyde as a protagonist. He's a hacker and prefers to not stick out. Similar to Yusei, Yusaku is high school aged, and he ends up facing up to the Knights of Hanoi, an opposing hacker group and mutual threat against the developers of Link Vrains, Soltech, who, interestingly enough, does show a darker side to them when it concerns different AI programs that are called the Ignis. 6 AI with free will that were designed to live in a virtual space called Cyber's World. In a confrontation with the Knights of Hanoi, Yusaku comes across one of the Ignis and captures it, knowing if the Knights are after it, it must be something to protect. So now we have the setup. Soltech and the Knights of Hanoi are after the Ignis, and for an unknown reason, and Yusaku is at the center of it all with the rivalry of the Knights and now Soltec on his trail. Yusaku begins to partner with the Ignis, dubbed I, although hesitantly at first, but he proves to be quite helpful in battle. So, I have to talk about Link summons here now. This is a little bit easier of a concept than Pendulums were, because for all intents and purposes, they're like Xyz monsters' long-lost cousins. Now, I know here this looks confusing, but let's break it down. So, summoning Link monsters here in a lot of situations is almost identical to Xyz summoning. However, instead of using its levels, it depends on the kind of monsters. So, it could be 2 monsters that have an effect, it could be 2 monsters of the Cyberse archetype. It's a bit more free and open for different kinds of decks. And second, these monsters don't have a defense value, so they can't be placed in defense mode. And finally, the arrows. So, Link monsters have different tiers to them based on the number of arrows that are present on the card. And you need to link Link monsters of lower links to get the stronger, higher links. The arrows directly correspond to the number of materials needed to summon it. Since they have link ratings, they do not have a level or a rank, meaning they can't be used to Xyz or Synchro summon other monsters. And spell or traps that affect monsters with a level or rank do not affect them. And finally, the bonus effects that they give off will affect the monster cards that are in the zones on the field that the arrows point to. This can be for buffs for your cards or nerfs for your opponent cards. So, it may not seem from my summary thus far that there are a lot of characters within the world of Marines, but it's largely because I wanted to save them for the duelist summary, as Yusaku as a protagonist is definitely the most removed from the bonds of friendship thus far. He grows to trust and have friends over the course of the series, definitely, but a lot of it happens later on, and surround details that I'd rather not spoil here. So, starting off with Yusaku, he runs a Cyberse deck with a few different notable ace cards. Starting off, we have the Code Talker and Decode Talker Link monsters. With the traditional 2500 attack, Ace is his Firewall Dragon. And oh boy, this monster caused quite the havoc in the TCG so hard, it actually got banned for a while before they made a version of it that wasn't so broken. His deck is really solid, and the strategies he employs throughout the series would make Yugi shit his leather pants. Yusaku was dueled 56 times over the course of the series and has won 53 of those duels. And he was in 3 duels that ended in a draw. This means that Yusaku has a 94% win rate. That is insane! Next up is Aoi Zaizen, otherwise known in Link Brains as the Blue Angel. Aoi has a bubbly personality and doesn't mesh well with Yusaku's more reserved tendencies. The two have allied with each other on numerous occasions, but this is the first main tag lead female relationship that isn't a close friendship. She starts off the series with a Trickstar deck that leads later on into using a Marincess deck. Both of these are really solid and follow the trend of following archetypes for very specific strategies. She dueled 10 times over the course of the series and is sitting at a solid 50% win rate. Moving forward, we have Amebeso, otherwise known as Ghost Girl in Link Brains. She's a mercenary hacker. Money talks for her, and whoever's willing to pay, she's willing to work for. Although she does take an interest in Yusaku after dueling him. She runs an Altergeist deck, which is really solid. It's built around having a lot of traps and monsters with a lot of negative effects for your opponents. However, for how good her deck is, of the 5 duels she's had throughout the series, she only wins once. For our final character summary, we have Varus, or Revolver in the Japanese version. Knowing this guy's archetype is various firearm terminology, it's not hard to see that these monsters, and even his name, were censored in the dub. He runs a Dark Dragon deck, which runs a lot of Bullet and Verilode monsters, and his ace is the Verilode Dragon, although he does have Fusion, Xyz, and Synchro variants for when the situation calls for it. He's dueled 13 times over the course of the series, one being a no result end, so we'll take that out of the equation, and he's won 6 times, so he's got a 50% win rate. He's only lost 4 of the 6 remaining duels, and then the 2 remaining in the draw. With this, Brains is a good show. I like it a lot. But we have the reality that it deserved a lot more, and the animators deserved a lot more. It's a shame that we totally could have had a final season or 2 to fully wrap up some of the storylines here. But at the end of the day, I'm glad that we did get what we did. So, we're here at the end. Our final show for the purposes of this discussion. This next show is our final, and as of right now, unfinished YuGiOh series. As of yet, we do not have an English dub, although it's heavily implied to be kind. YuGiOh 7s came out on April 4th, 2020 in Japan, and stars Yuka Odo. So far, Yuga is our youngest protagonist, as he's stated to be only in the 5th grade, making him about 11 years old. This seems to be a more lighthearted story, just to start, similar in the vein to GX and Zexal. Goha City, a relatively close future, is governed by the Goha Corp, which rules everything from schooling to dueling regulation, even to the clothing and shelter to its city citizens. Yuga is a mechanic and free thinker, so naturally he's going to clash with this invasive environment. So the new dueling mechanics in this show are interesting. We have a new method of dueling called rush duels. So this duel uses a reduced field of 3 monster and spell zones similar to speed duels, and I'll go over those in more detail in the next video, I promise. For rush duels, the player can summon as many level 4 and below monsters as they want. Higher level monsters must be tribute summoned like normal. On the draw phase, players will draw until they have 5 cards, and if they have 5 or more, then they only draw 1. There is no limit to the number of cards in their hand, and running out of cards in the deck during a draw phase results in no loss still. And the big change from speed duels, legend cards. This is effectively an ace card that the deck is usually built around. They are either iconic cards or cards that are good enough to earn the status, and there can only be a single legend card in a player's deck. And finally, maximum summons. So, maximum summons are multi-part kaiju monsters that can utilize multiple effects of all of its pieces. Maximum pieces will have the central unit, and then 2 side pieces. They share the same name of the central monster, but will have an R or L in the name to denote the right or left side piece. The side pieces can be used as singular monsters by themselves, so they have their own attack and defense value. But when the central monster is maximum summoned, you only go off the central piece's values. You could think of maximum summons like how Exodia worked back in Duel Monsters. 5 separate pieces for 1 monster, however instead of 5 it's 3, and instead of insta-win you get a beefy monster with multiple effects. With that out of the way, I'm going to do a much smaller story synopsis since this show is still ongoing, and because I myself have only seen a few episodes, so I don't want to report on what I haven't seen myself yet. So, Yuga early on is shown to be rebellious against the authority placed on him by the penalties placed on his dueling account because of his attempts to hack into his duel disk to install rush duel system. This is similar to both Yusei and his skill with engineering, and YuGiOh with his desire to invent a new dueling style, rush dueling for Yuya, and pendulum summoning for Yuga. Yuga is friends with a spiky blue-haired boy nicknamed Luke. His real name is Tatsuhisa Kamijo. He aims to be the #1 duelist and has taken an extreme interest in Yuga's rush duel system, and by association, distrusts Goha Corp for the risk they pose in shutting down rush duels. Early on, Yuga and Luke are led to a mysterious cave with an equally mysterious monument that displays a mysterious hologram man who baits the boys into a rush duel to test them to see if they're worthy of being the King of Duels. In the duel, the hologram man summons the legendary Blue Eyes White Dragon. And that's where the story synopsis will end right here, as it leads into the rest of the story. Finally, I want to go over some of the other characters who come to meet in 7s, as the group is together pretty early on. First off is Roman Kirishima. She's not too fond of duels, but as the series progresses, this is something that she comes to terms with and improves on. Next up is Gakuto Sogetsu, the student body president who, let's face it, he's Kiyotaka from Danganronpa, and that is more than fine by me. He's a fan of bad puns, and I have to make mention of this. One of his monsters' names is translated to Hero is the Yeet. This is most likely not going to be the English name of the card, but man, I do not even care. This is that card's name now. And with that, we've come to the end of the road on our YuGiOh anime retrospective. It's been a long time coming for me, and this script is nearing 15,000 words, but I am more than ecstatic to be able to spread the good word about how good and even insane this series gets. I'm going to take a little break now that this video is out, since I was working on this one and my Metroid chronology at the same time, but next time we'll be tackling the trading card game, how to play it, deck building tips, and examples of decks I like to run so you can see the logic behind them. Thank you all for watching this long video, and I hope to see you next time.